The Consuming Shadow is almost as indie can get. Brought to us by Ben Croshaw, better known as Zero Punctuation's Yahtzee, The Consuming Shadow combines elements of roguelite gameplay, storytelling adventure games, and Clue, or Cluedo if you're not American, to create a fantastically simple yet complex game with perfect elements of Lovecraftian horror. Despite the rough graphics and control style, if you're a fan of faster than light but want to try out something with adventure and horror elements to go along with it, The Consuming Shadow is a solid title and one of my personal favorites. But that's not all you want to hear, is it? While there isn't much overall to the game's story, if you're looking to go in blind and solve the puzzles for yourself, this is a good time to bow out. Otherwise, I'll be getting into mechanics and story elements and explain that despite the elementary look to the game, it's easily one of the most chilling Eldritch titles I've played, and a serious contender among inspirations like Eternal Darkness. Yeah, seriously, stop laughing. I'm not really even sure what initially drew me into this game. I either watched it in a YouTube playthrough once, or maybe Yahtzee plugged it on his show at one time, but regardless, something about it sold me pretty fast, and playing the game was one of the few times I was obsessed with completing it. Having originally purchased it from his site, I later picked it up again to start fresh with the Insanity Edition that was on Steam. So, I like it. Not hiding that fact. I get Yahtzee has a bit of a reputation for being the caustic critic, and the fact he tends to make his own games from time to time gives other critics their revenge fantasy of shitting all over his games because he said bad things about Smash Brothers or Shenmue, but I don't play that shit. Even if he dismissed Vermintide 2 as a live service Left 4 Dead knockoff, or claimed planets and Starbound were infinitely generated when they're provably finite, but in due time, this ain't the place. So, yeah, claim the biases all you want. I like this game, and I watch Yahtzee's videos. Game's still good, but you're free to think otherwise. I'll move on. So the graphics in this game are... yeah. The guy who proudly champions making his videos with the MS Paint shape tool is not going to blow anyone away with the artwork here, but it's functional, beyond its occasionally stilted goofery. What's with this run cycle? What's with this X? What's with this glow outline being cut off at the bottom of the queue? I could always play that devil's advocate fanboy card and claim that the game looks bad on purpose to unsettle you further, but that's about the same as claiming that the camera in Guild Wars 2 was bad because it added to the challenge of the jumping puzzles. You know, being stupid. Though I'll admit the aesthetic remains constant. It works once you get past the amateur look of the game. Everything is cast in silhouette. Your character, the monsters, nothing can be immediately identified, and that lends to the eldritch tone of the game, showing things that look vaguely familiar, but too hard to outright define the look of. The whole game comes across as very unsettling as a result. Sanity effects, in a manner that translates more to Eternal Darkness Light, do get placed into the game, the most obvious being a static filter over everything the lower the bar goes, which causes more in-game effects in odd things that you'll see during travel, controls being reversed, enemies being figments of your imagination, doors swapping positions, and of course resisting the urge to just end it all, with a menu mechanic that becomes harder to avoid the less sanity that your bar contains. And mark my words, that bar will go down. Sanity is almost impossible to keep in tip-top shape, and your options to restore it will pale in comparison to the myriad of ways that you'll lose it, so expect to see this happen a lot. Sanity is lost upon taking damage, or leaving a room while the enemies are still alive, anytime you get a creepy text message, anytime you use a spell or getting a bad random event result, or if you leave a dungeon early. Chances to restore it come down to hoping you get an encouraging text, a good random event result, or successfully resisting a suicide attempt. Otherwise, you can temporarily restore it by injecting narcotics. I feel like I should have put this up somewhere a lot earlier. If the visuals and themes aren't unsettling enough for you, the music and sound drive this point home hard. The soundtrack, composed by Mark Hadley, is absolutely superb for nailing down the atmosphere and tone of the game. There's low tones, creepy ambience, lots of piano, and generally unnerving notes that consist entirely of the soundtrack, and the horrific gurgles of the monsters help reinforce this. Though not every monster hits that mark. God, I never get this thing to start! Accompanied by disturbing squishy noises upon most enemy deaths, or surprisingly punchy gun sounds, this game's sound work outclasses its visuals by a mile. How does this whole thing work exactly? Well, if you've played Faster Than Light, aka FTL, you're a quarter of the way there. You play as a professor who's pored over ancient texts to find out that you have 60 hours to travel to Stonehenge and save the world from an eldritch god. but you don't know which one or how to banish it. For this you need to drive to quaintly named randomly generated villages across Great Britain, investigating the corrupted towns or buying supplies from the safe ones. Each trip will take a couple of hours depending on distance, so planning a route to Stonehenge while still visiting enough towns to gather information is paramount. Your drive might also be interrupted by text messages that can provide information, offer timed quests, grant you some money, or mess with your sanity levels. You'll also come across the occasional random event that has a varying chance of success depending on your choice. For example, if you find a priest at a church and tell him the truth about what's happening, he might confide in you and provide you some ammo, or head inside the church to off himself at a hit to your sanity. Lying to him might comfort him, or it'll enrage him to attack you with a loss of your health. Critical success is only offered if you have the corresponding equipment item in your inventory, which in the priest's case is the rosary. Gameplay, of course, isn't just limited to reading text blurbs at the whim of RNG. There is a combat and dungeon mechanic in this game, which is pretty straightforward despite taking some getting used to. Once you're in a dungeon, you'll see a Zelda-like map layout. You can only move left to right, but can move up or down a section by finding doors. Search every searchable object for items and clues while completing the assigned task at hand, like locating missing people or killing monsters, and then leave the dungeon for a potential clue to the banishing ritual. A dungeon's look isn't always just set dressing either. The warehouse map will most likely contain items and equipment when searching around, while office buildings are far more likely to hold clues, spells, and information. Knowing what kind of area you're about to enter will make it easier to decide if you want to clear it out, especially if you're low on sanity, health, or time. Your main form of defense is a pistol with very low ammo capacity. Because I know if I were heading across the country to fight an entire army's worth of corrupted creatures of darkness, I'd be thinking, yeah, 6 bullets ought to do it. Ammo isn't exactly plentiful, but it's not scarce either, as it's sold in most untainted towns, and it's a semi-regular drop from searches or enemies. But as pathetic as the pistol whip move looks, it's honestly your best available weapon for most creatures. While you likely won't get away from the coughers or spitters unscathed, once you understand how each enemy in the game works, taking most of them out with melee attacks is kind of a piece of cake, and saving ammo for tougher and more melee dangerous enemies is just a wiser move. Since the bonds of reality are slipping, magic makes a return to this universe, allowing your character to cast spells by chanting a number of hard-to-pronounce words with corresponding runes. These runes are not only vital to the god's banishment ritual, but allow you to cast incantations and counterspells to perform tasks, like opening doors, seeing in the dark, or just killing everything in the room. But each spell that isn't a counterspell will take a major toll on your sanity, so it's best using magic sparingly. Losing sanity is a borderline given, as is your health. And, as expected from something with a roguelike base, death is a near inevitability starting out, especially when you still need to get used to what you're doing. If you run out of time or die to your wounds, you'll get one of several endings, as well as some experience towards your next playthrough. Earning enough experience to level up will grant you a birth star, which you can place for stat boosts on your next playthrough. Just hover around the star map until you find a constellation, and the closer to the center you place the star, the higher the buff. Also, wonderful humility by Yahtzee there to have a constellation named the Emperor look exactly like his hat in Zero Punctuation. You're not stuck with just the Scholar as a playable character, however. Depending on your actions in the game, you can unlock other characters for later playthroughs. If a random encounter with a thief requires you to bring a lockpick somewhere, you'll have unlocked the melee-only Warrior. If you rescue a woman from a dungeon and she asks you to bring a pentagram to a certain location, doing so will unlock the spell-focused Wizard. If you manage to find your way to Stonehenge and confront the god to unlock ending A, B, or C, you'll get access to the Ministry Man, who's unquestionably Yahtzee's self-insert character Trilby from his Chizo Mythos games. He starts with 100 pounds and the banishment ritual, but only 24 hours to solve who the invading god is. My personal favorite is torn between the Warrior and the Scholar, as long as you ignore the Warrior's goofy animations, of course. With the Scholar, I don't really use the gun too often, but it can unquestionably save you in times where melee won't reach or getting too close would cause damage. I'm definitely not a fan of the Wizard, though. Casting spells without sanity loss has advantages, but the lack of melee and rune degradation system makes her the most difficult to use for me. You'd think a genius character would have at least tried to smack the things trying to kill her. Solving the god's identity is done with varying clues, some spelling out the obvious, and some leaving you with very unnecessary info that might not fall into place until you've gathered a lot more info. You can even find clues within the gameplay itself, from how the corpses you inspect died, to the colors of the runes on the wall in any given dungeon, and the color of the cultists that are wandering them. Even certain missions will spell things out for you without being recorded in your notebook. Fill out everything in the table as you can, and make sure that your incoming clues will back up your current deductions, and you'll have the invader pinned in no time. There's a few simple tips for solving it. Ignore marking down the ally and enemy clues, as they're not going to immediately help you find out the invader until you have a ton more info. Realize that there will only ever be 3 gods, 3 associated runes, 3 colors, and 3 aspects at any time, which makes process of elimination your friend. If you already got clues identifying gods with a purple and yellow color, but notice that there's a lot of red runes on the wall, well, guess what color the 3rd god is. Once you've identified its Bjarla in Stonehenge with the unending screams of madness, you can head into the final dungeon and probably get your ass kicked if you don't know what you're doing. Stonehenge is the largest dungeon, as expected, but it's actually pretty simple if you know what you're doing. Just find one of 3 locked doors. If there's a boss monster in it, you're in the wrong place. If there's a tunnel, you're almost done. Head down and move into the shrine. Remember that any body's means of death will tell you the aspect if you've missed it, and if you head in with less than 5 hours left, the runes on the wall will be glowing in the god's color. Casting the right spell with the right god's rune will open the portal and end with you coming face to intangible mass with the invading god, who's none too happy you ruined his vacation plans. You can combat against it by casting counterspells when they get cast, and pushing it further back into its realm. All the while, it'll toss out tentacles to drag itself towards you, which you can attack to remove, reveal eyes to drain your sanity, which can also be attacked, and summon creatures. Push him back far enough, cast the banishment spell one last time to remove him from the realm for good, and if you survive the fight with your sanity intact, you'll get the best ending. Take too many hits to your mental well-being, and you'll get the ending where you succeed, but are driven insane and institutionalized for your trouble. Even if you die during the fight, you'll still succeed, it's just not the most ideal outcome. Remember, if you're low on sanity, shoot up before you go in if you want the best chance at the good ending. People seem far less judgmental for how you've kept reality from being overwritten if you're drugged up rather than mentally unstable. It's a pretty dark commentary on society when you think about it. That's really what I love about this game overall. It never shies away from darkness and really nails the true feeling of Lovecraftian horror. It's not about tentacles and asylums, but about the human mind coming up against forces beyond any sense of comprehension and knowledge it's ever gained. You do not kill the invading god, you merely push it away and delay its takeover for another time in another dimension. If you're finding the main game a bit too simple after a while, the Insanity Edition has challenge modes that you can do, which frustratingly cost a burst star to unlock, as well as an endless mode dungeon where you can try to head as deep as possible before you succumb to death. I personally find the regular game more than fine, and despite being annoyingly good at it now, I can always rely on RNG to screw things up for me, so not every playthrough is a cakewalk. Get past this art style, the randomness in the gameplay, and any personal hangups you might have with the game's creator, and The Consuming Shadow is the solid, creepy, and highly entertaining game once you've got a handle on it. As expected, and probably seen most often with me on this show as it is, The Consuming Shadow earns an easy go rating from me. I have no trouble recommending playing it, and despite the rough edges, it does everything it sets out to do perfectly. This might not be the right month, but at least there will be one other planned game I'd like to get out of the way, so I hope to see you on the next one. Isn't it great when you plan 4 Halloween episodes and barely scrape out one? I'm not on a roll here, but if I get back to any sense of normalcy, I'd still suggest checking out my Twitch channel, as Weeaboo Wednesday is sometimes a thing, and we're nearly completed with the Octopath. Also, there's plenty more indie games I plan to show off live, so head to twitch.tv/chaosd1 if you're interested. Follow me on Twitter where I ramble about nothing and pin whatever my latest episode was by heading to @chaosd1, or save yourself the headache by looking at nothing but those show and stream announcements with @IndieStop. That's a D1 in the middle there, just murdering my metrics with that name. Keeping me afloat are my inexplicably ever-generous patrons from Patreon. Pro tip, they're not called Patreons, where you can head to patreon.com/chaosd1 to see early episodes, updates, and future plans for episodes. With that, I'll once again read out my raid leader and higher supporters: Nate McPherson, Neander, Kaismay, Sonic Rose, and A. Smith. Thanks again for watching and supporting, and I'll see you whenever I make the next video.